flashbulb.
Looking to create a model that stands out in the display case? Then this is the episode for you. I'm going to show you how to create a great looking digital camouflage paint job quickly and easily using a mask set I've developed. So without delay, let's get started. You may recall I'd built and primed the model in a Mr. Surfacer Black in the previous video. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to check it out because there is a heap of amazing detail around these Ukrainian Bradleys, thanks to Sam Dwyer, of course, for sharing his vast knowledge on the subject. Before I start the painting process, I gently dust the model with an anti-static brush to remove any dust or debris that has settled on the surface. These Ukrainian Bradleys were all delivered in the Khark tan colour, so that is my first layer of paint to be applied over the primer I'd sprayed in that previous video. I'm using the AK Real Colours Khark tan and begin with the modular armour assemblies. The black base allows me to build the tan colour up in an irregular way rather than flooding the surface with that colour. I want some of that black to affect that tan colour and add some variation in the finish, hence I'm spraying the colour in an irregular way. The other detail I'm wanting to replicate on these blocks is when they are damaged and replaced. Often the bricks would be different colours, so I'm leaving some of the squares in that black primer, and after masking the tan parts I could go back and spray them using the modern Russian green. The colour works well with the black base as it adds a certain level of depth to that finish and brings that green a little closer to my vision for that colour. Removing the tape masks gives me a look at the two colours working together and the way they sit on the body of that vehicle. Just as I did on that Brat armour, I applied the Khark tan over the body of the Bradley. I'm focusing on defined areas and applying that colour in a focused but modelled way to again ensure that black base is impacting the colour and the finish I can achieve. The tan elements on the vehicle are only being used to act as my base colour in this digital camouflage scheme, so a lot of this tonal work will amount to nothing on the finished model, but there is a chance some of it will be seen, so I persevere with this application. The same techniques are used over the shapes of the turret. There is something satisfying about seeing these shapes of this model evolve in the Khark tan. I hadn't realised how much I liked the look of that colour until now. Something to ponder for future subjects perhaps. As I teased in the intro, I've developed a mask set for this kit that should make painting this scheme accessible to modellers of most skill levels. The shapes and patterns were inspired from the instruction sheet and I set about redrawing them in Adobe Illustrator and then producing the kit through my digital print and cut machine that I'm lucky enough to have access to through my day job. The tan elements of that scheme are now applied over the model using the outline drawing as well as the colour plate from the instruction sheets to fine tune the positions. These vehicles saw great variation in the application of these patterns, so some degree of creativity would be completely acceptable. It's possible to create small cuts in the vinyl to help it sit over the raised details and just sit a little more cleanly. And I'm also able to trim excess vinyl where the mask spills over the shapes of the parts. A liquid mask can then be used to mask some of the sections that would be too awkward to mask using a tape, and the model could then be sprayed in that secondary camouflage colour, the light green. XF14 is called out as the colour, however I added a touch of Parker green to the mix to give it a little more contrast with the Khark tan. It was way too rich for what I was hoping for, but it was easy enough to dial that colour back by applying a misted layer of the XF14 over the finish. By misting that paint, I'm essentially creating a filter that is skewing or tinting the colour rather than changing it, and it's a handy way to tame your paint work or just adjust the tones without having to completely repaint. It was then a matter of repeating the masking process, only this time I'm masking the sections I want to remain in that light green colour. It's important to ensure the paint is dry before applying these masks, and I'd recommend around 24 hours. However, that will depend on the type of paint you are using and the way that you're applying it. Vinyl masks work best over flat surface, so some additional masking will be required when they run through the sharp angles and deep recesses. I can use that liquid latex mask for these areas to connect the two halves of the mask sections. It is then just a matter of applying my modern Russian green over the model, and you may notice again the way I'm applying the paint, a light misted coat to start and then building that coverage up. Trying to flood the coverage is a recipe for disaster, so misted light coats is the way to go. You may also notice the angle I'm spraying at, around 90 degrees from the surface of the model, and this will help hold the straight lines in that masking pattern even where the vinyl masks are bridging over rivets or recesses. I can then apply the green over the surfaces that have no masks, and I chose to use the Kark Tan as my base colour as it may affect the tone of that green, and I wanted to ensure that it was consistent from the sides to the horizontal surfaces. A quick inspection of the green to make sure I haven't missed anything, and the masks could then be removed. The adhesive of the vinyl is quite strong, but it comes off beautifully once you manage to get the corners started. It's important when doing any type of masking project to ensure your model has been primed and prepared properly to ensure no paint is coming off at this stage when removing the mask tape. Removing the mask is always so satisfying, and with the turret loosely set in place, I get a feel for the look of the model and I'm really liking what I see. With the camouflage scheme in place, I could then methodically work around the model, fitting the small pieces I'd left off prior to painting. I started with the wire grab handles around the side skirts as well as the Pioneer tools. The modular Brat armour that had been pre-painted could then be glued in place around the turret. This fell in place easier than I was expecting, and in no time I was able to fit the large side blocks in place using a touch of super glue so as not to taint the paint with any modelling cement. The reactive armour blocks cover the majority of the masking I'd done earlier, but I like the bulky look it gives to the shapes of that vehicle. I'd noticed in reference these headlight assemblies had wiring running from under them, under the armour packs there, so that detail was added using lead wire and again was held in place with a spot of super glue. I'm highlighting the green here with a lightened mix of the Russian green with some deck tan. The paint is thin to around 70-30 thinner to paint and is applied over selected horizontal surfaces and edges to offer some interest in that paintwork. Now excuse my inconsistency, but I've moved to a black background for the following footage as a bit of a test. So a bit of audience participation please. Let me know what you think about the black background. Is it better than white? No different? Don't care. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And you can't have highlights without some shading, so a thinned mix of black, green and black is used to create depth in that green around the recessed and heavy details. Enamel washes will shift that tone of that green again, so this is just a foundation step to create volume in that colour. The green on these Bradleys should present as quite a deep green, so applying techniques such as this will create depth in that mid-tone without losing the character in that green colour. The headlights, tow cable and tools could then be painted in a mix of acrylic paints using a fine brush. I like painting the tools with the timber handles, even if in reality they may have been painted green, because I find those tiny splashes of colour and brightness just add some contrast and a little bit of spark to the model and help break up the shapes around the subject. I'd always wanted to display this model in the field, so stowage was always going to be playing a part in the display. I picked up a set of modern US stowage from Value Gear and set about playing a game of Tetris in order to make it sit nicely in the stowage basket. And I'll address the stowage in the next episode, but for now it was set aside for painting. For some reason it's such an unnecessarily hot topic at the moment, and that is gloss varnishing before you apply your decals. Whether you choose to gloss coat or not is completely up to you. Do what works for you, but for me, the gloss coat gives me the most predictable surface over which to apply my decals. There is a science behind why that is the case, so maybe that for another time. But for now, the model is coated in UV gloss varnish straight from the rattle can, and the decals are set in place after it had time to dry. The decals settle with the aid of Mr. Setter first, and then a decal softener over the top. That rough anti-slip texture on the top of the turret is a prime location for a decal to silver and fail. However, the gloss varnish and the setting solution and softener means it settles in place perfectly. The tip of a cotton bud can also be used to help it into the recesses. A couple of coats of satin varnish to seal them in, and once cured, I can move to my pin washes. It's been said many times before, but a pin wash is such a satisfying part of any build, as long as you understand how it works and what the purpose of doing it is. The pin wash should add depth and false shadows around the details of the model, which should visually lift those details around the shapes of that model. So when we consider this, it's important to consider the colour of the paintwork and the colour the wash should be. For the Russian green elements, I'm applying a darkish bluish grey wash designed for NATO tanks. The effect of the wash will deepen the overall look of that green and drag it closer to the green I had in my mind when starting this project. I always tend to paint light and weather dark. These pre-mixed enamel washes sometimes require further thinning with an enamel thinner. Thinning them will help the paint flow more easily around the details. However, it does sometimes require a helping hand with the brush. For the tan parts, 2 shades of brown were used for the wash. By using the brown enamels, I'm keeping the integrity of that colour through those tan elements, but hopefully adding some shadows and lines through those recesses and details. You can see how simply and easily the paint flows around the detail by just touching the loaded brush against the surface of the model. And you can immediately see the lift it gives those details. The same techniques are used around the turret assembly to keep that finish unified over the complete model. After a few hours of dry time, the enamel washes can be tidied up using a soft makeup sponge. Because the enamels are still quite soft, that makeup sponge is able to remove that paint that sits on the parts. However, it will leave any of the wash that has found its way into the recesses and around the details. A brush moistened with white spirit or a tip of a cotton bud can be used to remove the enamel paint if it has been drying for longer or if the sponge is failing to move that paint. With the foundation layers of paint complete, it was now time to prepare myself for the weathering phase. But that is a video that deserves its own space, so for today I'm calling this episode complete. There is something about these urban digital camouflage schemes that keeps drawing me to them. I think it's the absurdity of just how effective straight lines and blocks of colour can be when being used to disguise a 27-ton hunk of metal. Not only that, but I always enjoy the process of masking and painting them. There is nothing like that moment you start removing the masks and watch that scheme appear before your eyes. Masking schemes like this can turn a few people off, but I've made it easy for you for this one by developing a mask set to take all that guesswork out of the paintwork. And to celebrate this release, I'm giving away a set to one lucky viewer. To be in the draw, simply like the video and make sure you are subscribed, and then comment below including the phrase "Mask me up." I'll draw a winner by the end of July. If you can't wait for the draw and you want this set, It's available along with many others on my website, so be sure to check it out, and for a limited time use the code DIGI15 for 15% discount off the new release set. Want to help me grow this channel? It is as simple as hitting that like button and making sure you're subscribed. And if you want to help in a greater way and access exclusive content, then please join me and the community over on my Patreon page. And a special shout out to my latest killer kangaroos, Masked Modeler and Andy Conway. Your support is truly appreciated and helps me cover my costs in creating this content. And of course, thank you to my Wombat Warriors. If you wanted to show your support in another way, you could always consider buying me a coffee. Don't forget to let me know if you prefer the black or the white background. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family and share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
Is that right? Camouflage? Is that the new thing?